All right, it is noon here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So, time to say good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. And welcome to this edition of PON Live from the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. I'm Nicole Bryant, the Managing Director here at the Program on Negotiation, and I am very pleased to welcome all of our community members joining us from all over the world for today's event featuring Shannon Fletcher, who I will be introducing in just a moment. But before I do, a big welcome to everyone who's joining PON Live for the first time. This is a series of free open events that the Program on Negotiation puts on to showcase research both from our faculty at Harvard University, but also from other guest faculty from around the world on negotiation, mediation, and conflict resolution. And as ever, I like to start by thanking the incredible team here. We were just talking about Thanksgiving and gratitude. I am so grateful for our fabulous event staff. We've got Ken and Laura and Riley who have done so many wonderful events, put on so many wonderful events, and do so many other wonderful activities here at the Program on Negotiation. So a big thanks to them for everything they've done getting us here today. So today's webinar will last an hour, and first, our invited speaker will present for about 30 or 40 minutes on her research. And at the conclusion of that time, we will have a question and answer session. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to input them, and then we will have a discussion around some of your questions. As ever, this webinar is being recorded, so if you have to duck out at any point, or if you want to rewatch or share with a friend, it will be posted on the PON website in just a couple of days. And I think that's it for general announcements. I will now introduce today's speaker, Shannon Fletcher, who is presenting on navigating workplace conflict. And we are so grateful that Shannon has elected to join us today. She is a teaching associate in management at the Foster School of Business at the University of Washington. And she's going to be presenting on research that she has been doing around conflict in the workplace and that has been published in Negotiation and Conflict Management Journal. So we are really looking forward to benefiting from her wisdom. I think this is practical information and advice that can be applied to a lot of scenarios. I know that I am curious to learn from her, and I'm sure that's true for many of you. So without further ado, Shannon, Dr. Fletcher, I'm so pleased to have you, and the Zoom floor is now yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm just grateful to be here with all of you. So thank you for that. Um, let's see, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, as she said, I am a teaching affiliate at the University of Washington. I published recently in the Negotiation and Conflict Management Research Journal, and it was exciting to do that, and I'm excited to share today with you my research that was published. As you said, many of us deal with conflict in the workplace, and according to research, a third of employees deal with conflict on a daily basis. So it really touches all of us. And managers say that they spend up to 40% of their time handling conflict. So it is definitely something that is extensive, and I'm hoping today to share some practical tools with you so that at the end of today's conference, you will be able to walk away with some practical tools that you can use either at work and honestly, even in our personal lives. I'm not remiss in that today is the beginning of Thanksgiving week, and oftentimes when we get together for holidays, it can be a lot of fun to be with family and with friends, but it can also have some conflict that's involved in it too. So hopefully you can even practice these during those moments as well. So thank you again for having me here. Our agenda for today, there's going to be three things that we do. The first thing is we're going to learn about how the body responds to conflict. And it's important just to set the context of how our body is responding so that we can understand mentally how we can respond and how we can, instead of reacting to conflict, actually have a good response. Next, we're going to review the conflict management models that are currently out there just to ground us in current research. And then I'll share with you two behaviors from my most recent research on how to navigate conflict. So thank you for being here. First, what I want to do is I want to invite you to identify a recent conflict or maybe a conflict that you're going through right now. So if you can think of a particular situation, it'll help you as we unpack some of these concepts. So think about anything, whether it be a misunderstanding that you had with somebody recently, or a disrespectful comment that was maybe said to you that just kind of unnerved you, maybe an ongoing argument that you're having, a longstanding dispute, maybe it's a toxic workplace, someone that sabotaged you. Any of these things will do. But if you can kind of think of a particular situation, um, thinking about this conflict, I know when I think about conflict, I can tell that my entire body is responding, whether it's my jaw gets a little bit tight, or I furrow my brow, or my heart begins to race. And these are very natural responses of how our body responds to conflict. So just kind of take a moment to think about the conflict and then how your body is responding. Okay, with that, let's get into our first section of how the body actually responds to conflict. Okay, so how the body works is we have 12 cranial nerves that comes from the back of our brain into our spinal cord. And 80% of them are afferent and 20% are efferent. And what this means is that 80% of those nerve endings are in our body and they're sending messages up to our brain to tell our brain how to respond. And 20% are from our brain giving information to our body, telling our body how to respond. So what this means is as much as we think that we're being very rational and we're making those decisions, really our body is influencing how we're making those responses. So it's good to know that. The next bullet point there, you can see that this vagus nerve is connecting our striated muscles in our face. So that's our facial expressions that we're giving. And it connects those to our throat, to our stomach, our liver, our spleen, our pancreas, and our gut. So all of these major organs. And why this is important is because our facial expressions, whether we realize it or not, in 1/32 of a second, will give these flashes of facial expressions that other people are picking up. And it tells other people whether you're in a stressful state or whether you're in a calm and relaxed state and how they can engage with you. So your body is picking up if you're stressed, and then it's sending messages to other people to let them know if they can engage with you or not. And it's also interesting that all of these major organs are being touched through our vagus nerve, and it's ending up in our gut. And I know in the English language, there's a lot of idioms that use this phrase gut, such as having a gut feel about something, or something is gut wrenching, or having a gut check, even hating his or her guts, spilling my guts, going with your guts. And we say these things because I think that we know that our gut has a strong influence in how we interpret things and how we handle life. And in fact, the NIH just this year had a study saying there's 168 million neurons in our gut. So our gut is really like a second brain. And these neurons are there and they're very practical because they aid us in digestion, but it also helps us with our mood and mood regulation. We also know that 95% of our serotonin is produced within our gut. And so that is also having an impact on our mood and how we're handling things. So again, all of this is important because we're involuntarily evaluating our environment through the social engagement system. We're saying, am I safe? And is the other person safe? So this next slide, how does your body respond during conflict? You might have heard of the saying, being triggered. Well, scientifically, when we say that we are being triggered, it is indicated by our heart rate being elevated to 100 beats per minute. And when this happens, there's adrenaline and cortisol that's released into the bloodstream, and it's influencing how our body is responding or reacting to the conflict or the threat that's at hand. Now, some things that you might not know is that during this process, when our body is being flooded with all these hormones, our vision is being narrowed. It's tunnel vision. And what that means is that your peripheral is kind of going dormant, that you're just focusing on the thing in front of you. So that helps aid in the fight or flight response, but it also means that our vision is compromised. We're not seeing some of the extra data. Our inner ear is also compromised. And so we're not picking up really high tones or really low tones. So I don't know if you've ever been in a fight before and someone told you like, I don't think you heard me. You might not have heard something because maybe it was in the peripheral or maybe it was a tone that you just couldn't pick up. And so we need to know that when we get into a conflict, our body is responding. We're not as calm as we could be. And so when we're in this response, we need to adapt to the temporary physical limitations that we have. And there's all sorts of temporary physical limitations we could have. And I have three listed on this screen. When we break a bone, we wear a cast. We try to help ourselves out, reset the bone, and then we're patient with ourselves until that bone recovers, right? When we sprain our ankle, we use crutches. We alleviate pressure or putting weight onto that ankle so that we can recover. And then when we scrape a knee, we use a bandage. And so just like when we're in conflict, we might think that we still have a rational brain on, but we actually have kind of this physical temporary limitation. And so we need to pause and we need to take care of ourselves so that we can have an accurate assessment of what's happening around us, knowing we have these compromised limitations. So when we're in this conflict response, we're having high arousal. And high arousal really intensifies our feelings and our thoughts. So when you have positive arousal, such as when you're first dating somebody, those thoughts, those feelings intensify. So you can kind of think of maybe one of your first dating experiences and your positive arousal of how much even more that you feel attracted to this person. Well, the same is true for negative arousal, is that those thoughts intensify. So you have even more negative thoughts about somebody than you do naturally. So we don't really have those rational thoughts. And oftentimes we're forgetting kind of those peripheral thoughts about somebody when we're highly aroused and when our amygdala is on fire. Um, and so we're forgetting that that person that we're upset at, maybe they took a shift for us last week, or maybe it's one of our relatives that we love dearly, but they just said something annoying, and we forget to how to balance those thoughts, to have the positive and the negative balanced. Um, and then lastly, we can have a little less compassion for other people and ourselves when this cognitive processing is going off wire. So what do we do about this? Um, I know for myself, I used to have a meeting, a bi-monthly meeting that was frustrating, and I always got highly aroused during this meeting because there was topics that came up that were difficult. And so whenever I had this meeting, I just booked my calendar. It happened right during the lunch hour. And so I just took my lunch afterwards and I went for a walk just to try to let that cortisol kind of dissipate a little bit and that I could re-enter my day after that meeting and after my walk, being a more calm person. And the reason that we want to be calm is because when we're calm, we often find we have choices that we just couldn't see before. And we know this. I know that when my children, when they ask me for ice cream, it could be a really fun, exciting thing. Let's go get ice cream. It sounds like a fun idea. And I can be flexible and think, okay, maybe after dinner or maybe we have to get our homework done, we can go out for ice cream. But that same request, if I'm not calm, like if I'm driving in traffic, or maybe I just had a bad day at work, or maybe I'm trying to balance a couple different responsibilities at the time, I might not respond quite as positively. The same thing when one of my students asked me for an extension on a paper, based on what's kind of happening around me or the noise that's happening around me, I might respond differently. So what's really important is to get calm. And you can see these bullet points on the screen that you might choose to ignore smaller conflicts when you're calm. You put aside personal differences, you extend grace, you might agree to disagree, you might not jump to conclusions quite as rapidly when we just feel that we're calm. Dr. Porges says if our nervous system detects safety, it's no longer defensive. And that is actually a real key principle to not be defensive. And the trick is just to really calm our body. And that's why I wanted to ground us. And what is our body doing during a conflict situation? And then how can we help it out a little bit by maybe going on a walk, being physical, taking a pause, taking a break to get to a calm place? Because that's the number one thing that we can do during conflict is to help our nervous system calm down. Okay, let's look at some of those conflict management models that we have. So the one that's been out there for the longest, you might be familiar with it, is called the Tolman-Kilman conflict model. And it has been out for 50 years. It has two axes. It might be a little bit difficult to see on this model here, but you can see horizontally, it goes from less cooperative to more cooperative. And then vertically, it's more assertive to less assertive. And then you'll see 5 different ways that you can handle conflict. You can either avoid, and that's saying that I don't really care about my needs in the situation or your needs, so let's just not talk about it, let's just avoid it. You can choose to compete, the top left quadrant there, saying that my needs are really important. So if you were like two roommates trying to figure out who's doing dishes, you could either avoid the conflict altogether, or you could compete and you could say, I want to make sure that my roommate does all of the dishes for me. Um, or you could accommodate the bottom right there. You could say, I don't really care. I've got extra time. I've got two hands. I can do all of the dishes, not the opposite really of competing. You could compromise that kind of that middle ground there. You could say, I will wash all of my dishes. You wash all of your dishes. And this is where most conflicts happen, right? Is we come up with some type of compromise. We kind of divide up the pie of how we're going to do things. You do yours, I do mine. But we know that ultimately, the best solution is when we can collaborate. And this is when we can find more creative solutions. So instead of ignoring things or trying to dominate or get different people's needs met, in collaborating, we're really getting both parties' needs met. And this is where the best type of conflict resolution happens. And that's because we're sitting on the same side of the table with that person. We're looking at the problem together. We're not opposed to each other. And as you can see from this model, it really has, it pits needs against each other for most of the outcomes here. It's how much is my needs going to get met and how many are your needs going to get met. And in the middle of the conflict, it's really difficult to kind of do this collaborator, do this calculation of whose needs are most important. Um, and so several researchers have actually questioned, is this the best labels for these axes for conflict management? And they've questioned it. And then the other thing about this model here is that it doesn't really give you strategies on how to engage in conflict or when to engage in conflict. And so because of that, there is another conflict model here, another axis, and this is by De Silva and Eisen, and this came out in 2005, so 20 years ago. And you can see here that it ranges from destructive to constructive, and this is a model that I really appreciate because on the left-hand side, it kind of tells you how not to engage in conflict, and then on the right-hand side is really positive things of ways to engage in conflict that is either effective or efficient. And then you can see the other axis there is conflict engaging to conflict avoiding. So whether we're leaning into conflict or whether we're leaning away. And we're going to dissect these a little bit more. Okay, so part of their model also, you can see here, is dominating and reacting or avoiding and retreating. And we're going to retain these constructs. So dominating, as you might know, is either yelling, getting big, demanding people to do things, reacting really strongly. And then the other one is avoiding or retreating. And that could be physically avoiding, it could be not bringing up a topic, it could be sugarcoating something. But what's interesting about this is that when we get into a conflict, it's really just information. It's information that we need to digest. So if there's mold that's growing in your fridge, it's good to have that information so that you're able to get rid of the mold, right? Because mold is going to continue to grow if you don't get rid of the source. Or just like your car, you have instruments that tell you whether you have gas in your car. And if your gas is getting low, if you just ignore it, you're going to be in trouble. You'll be stranded on the side of the road somewhere where you don't want to be. And so just like avoiding conflict can be problematic, dominating and reacting can also be very problematic because the relationship is going to suffer. Even if in the short term it sounds great to just get something off your chest or to dominate or to control the situation, long term we know that that is not very effective and it harms the relationship. I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and I know that we're kind of known for being a little passive aggressive or avoiding conflict. But actually, that's just as ineffective as dominating or reacting. They're both equally damaging. And even if you can rationalize that one of these behaviors is something that you want to do to engage into a conflict, we have to remember that there's other people at work, right, who are watching our behaviors. Our supervisor might overhear something. Our peers are seeing how we're reacting to something. We might see a customer that's seeing how we're engaging with somebody. And they're keeping note of these things. Do I want to work with this person in the future? Do I want to write them a letter of recommendation in the future? Do I want to work on the next project with them? And so we know that these are not great behaviors to engage in for conflict. Okay, next, part of the research, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the research project, but we added another response that can be destructive to a relationship, and that is called defensive. And I think all of us know about this behavior, and it's very natural that when we feel physically threatened or emotionally threatened, that we are self-protective and we are a little bit defensive. But this can also be problematic with how we're handling conflict. So if we were together, I would have you practice some defensive phrases. But since we're not physically together and you just get to see me on a screen, I'm going to try to do this with you. Maybe you can practice wherever you are, whether at home or in the office. So uh, when we're defensive, a lot of being defensive is a lot with those facial muscles and facial expressions, and it's a lot with our tone. So let's practice what we're doing when we're handling conflict in a negative way. So if we were going to avoid conflict, you wouldn't say anything at all, or you'd sugarcoat something. But if you're going to dominate, you could say this phrase in a way of, let me try, um, what led to the product deadline slipping? You can kind of open up your eyes, you can get a little bit louder, and that puts somebody on the defensive, right? There were a lot of other people involved in this situation. Or the other person can maybe start off in a defensive way, and they could say something like, what led to the project deadline slipping? And you could respond, there was a lot of other people involved in that situation, right? So there's many ways you could say it to be either dominating or defensive. Let's do another one. Why was a project not shared last week? And the person might say, I'm not sure what the problem is. I can explain. Or they might say something like, I'm not sure what the problem is. I can explain. Um, and you can see by even saying these or hearing me say them, it just feels kind of tense, like that we just kind of want to walk away from the situation. Let me do one more. Um, you could say, help me understand what's going on here. And that's very dominating. Or you could say, help me understand what's going on here. And the person then it might respond because we're having a social engagement system. When they feel you're attacking or even being defensive, they'll probably be defensive too. So I've actually been quite swamped. And you kind of see them kind of pulling away from the engagement. So now that we've practiced what not to do, let's practice what we should do. And so, again, we really want to be aware of our facial expressions because that's what's going to help somebody know that they can come into a conversation or can communicate with us and that we're at this safe and a calm spot. And also vocalization. So, that can be your tone, what words that you stress, the rhythm, the pauses, and even the pacing of what we're doing. So, really think about that vagus nerve and just sending a calm tone to people. I'm also reminded of, as we think of tone and facial expressions, I have a small child that I take to daycare. And I know one day she was just a little bit hesitant to go into class and she was clinging to my leg and didn't want to go in. And I'll never forget that her daycare teacher just opened up her posture. She opened up her arms. She opened up her face. She put on just such a great smile. And she was like, Carly, so good to see you. And I was so amazed because my daughter went from kind of curled up and defensive to, I see my teacher, and she responded in such a positive way. And so it's amazing when we think about our tone and our facial expressions, how the other person is going to respond in kind, in a positive way. Okay, so these same exact phrases, we can take a pause. And sometimes I even just put my hand on my heart just to remind myself that everything's okay. We can take a breath and we can just pause before we engage into a conflict. And you can say, what led to the product deadline slipping? And I even felt my shoulders kind of decrease a little bit there. Um, and the person might say, there were a lot of other people involved in this situation. And then they might go on to explain exactly what happened with the project. Or why was a project not shared last week? I'm not sure what the problem is, but I can explain. And you can see a much more positive tone here. You could also say, help me understand what's going on here. And then I've actually been quite swamped. And you can just see that it just feels so much more peaceful that we want to engage in things. And hopefully that was a good just demonstration of how our words and our tone and our vocal pacing can really help somebody engage with us in conflict. Okay, let's get to the conflict management research that I was sharing with you. Now that we know we need to be calm to cue that safety for other people, let me tell you a little bit about the research. So you can see on the screen the demographics for this particular study. So this study that I'm going to talk to you about really stemmed from a prior research that I did. So the prior research, I interviewed some executives and senior managers about some of their employees who contributed to a thriving work environment and some who did not. And by looking at these stories, they were told all these stories and that were coded And what was interesting to me was it really seemed like how employees navigated conflict within the workplace was really the differentiator between employees who were contributing to thriving environment and those who were not. And so, because of that prior work, I really wanted to dig into this concept of conflict and how people were navigating conflict at work. And so, this current study, there was 105 business professionals who participated. You can see that they had almost 18 years of work experience, almost 10 years of managerial experience, and it skewed slightly male. This was an inductive study. So, what that means is that I listened, collecting the data, observing the data, then looked for patterns, and then from those patterns, suggest a theory. And that's what you're going to get to hear today. So me and my research partner were able to code all of the data, and we had to have inter-rater reliability, which meant that we continued to go through the data until we had an agreement on each of those codes. So what we found, I think, is interesting, and I want to share that with you next. So you can see in the top right quadrant here on this matrix, the positive constructive behavior is what we labeled engage the mess. And what this means is the willingness to step into conflict rather than avoiding it. So calmly taking an action step. And this isn't confrontational, it's not argumentative, it's not trying to get blood, but it's just being calm and actually leaning in to that conflict. So you can see here, there were 6 different themes that were found across these stories. And there was a whole bunch of stories that were told, things like people skipping out on work and not showing up for a shift, to a new employee incentive program that was being rolled out people didn't really agree with, and that was the conflict. People talked about personality differences and having to come together to work through a project. There was also times when there was conflicts between production and distribution. There was just a variety of different conflicts that I got to learn about. And then you can see there were 6 different themes. The top 2 themes here, being aware of other people and taking an action step, almost tied for how often that they were mentioned with this behavior of engaging the mess. And that really meant a lot, seeing that in the data, because when we approach conflict, we have to be aware of the other person. And that means that we want to be safe, which is very natural, but being aware that the other person wants to feel safe as well. And so, how do we seek to understand, or how do we try to hear both sides, or have empathy for the other person? How do we listen or show curiosity to be aware of them? And then, how do we take an action step? How do we be proactive, ask questions, have a respectful conversation, and actually engage? So, those are the 2 most important kind of sub behaviors of this engage the mass main behavior. The next thing you'll see is communicating clearly. So that's saying I statements or really clearly asking what your request is. Then you can find common ground. So if I have a TA who maybe didn't grade papers on time, I need to be first aware of them, maybe that they're going through, I don't know, finals are happening right now, or maybe have a family situation, or maybe they just got sick. Being open to these possibilities, being aware of their life, taking an action step, so actually emailing them or reaching out to them about my concern, communicating clearly, so just saying, I noticed that papers were not graded, so just clearly but kindly saying it, and then trying to find a common ground or workable solution. So being on the same side of the table, let's look at this problem together. How can we make sure the papers are graded by a certain time? Applying teamwork is really leaning on that we. How can we work on this problem together? Can I help you this time around? Or can I help with some prioritization of which papers that you're grading first? And then the last subcomponent here, it didn't happen quite as often, but I felt in the data, these stories were really compelling, is when people could adapt or be open to influence. So this is when someone would just say that they, made a mistake, or how can I really help with this? So in this kind of TA grading paper example, it would be something like, how can I help maybe highlight when the grades need to be due, or do you need me to check in with you, or how can I kind of come alongside you and help with this? So that's engage the mass. This concept of leaning in and engaging the mass, it really makes me think of Lisa Su. She's the CEO of AMD. And she has this quote. I'm going to read it to you because I think it is key. She says, run towards the hardest problem. That's where you'll find the biggest opportunities. And that's what she did, quite honestly, because she joined the company. There was a lot of layoffs. It was very difficult. But it says this is where you learn the most, where you set yourself apart, and most importantly, it's where you grow. And I would say the same thing for conflict is even though we maybe want to kind of lean out of conflict, if you lean in, if you identify a conflict and you lean into it, that is where the most growth and the most learning is going to happen. And the biggest problem solving is going to happen. Okay, so this engage the mess. It's focusing on the problem on a non-aggressive way where you're keeping yourself calm and the other person calm. And you're really focusing on the problem rather than the other person. So you're taking this mindful action step and you're asking yourself, how can I do this in a calm way? And there's three things that I would like to pose to you here. The first one is just being curious. I know for myself, being curious during a conflict can seem so counterintuitive and the last thing that I really want to do. I know that there was a time when I was pregnant with my first child, and we decided the best plan for us was to have a nanny. And so we courted this nanny during my entire pregnancy. We had all of the paperwork filled out for this nanny to take over to watch my child. We took her and her husband out to eat. We became good friends. We made sure they knew the house, that we had a great setup for this nanny situation. And we were just very positive about this relationship and how it was going to go forward. 2 days before I was supposed to start work, I got a note from her and she said that she was quitting before she even started. And I was very upset. I didn't quite understand what I was supposed to do. I felt like I was left holding the bag. How am I supposed to go to work? I didn't have any childcare options as another option to fall back on. And I just thought at that moment, I don't understand any piece of data that she could give me that would make me feel less upset about this problem. But my husband urged me. He said, "Let's just ask questions. Let's just be open. Let's figure out, a way that we can solve this." Um, and as we did that, and as we were curious, we found out that she had a health issue, and because of the health issue, she was putting our child in jeopardy as well as her own health. And so, finding that out, it made me realize, oh, there is extra data that I can learn that can make me feel more calm or realize that we can be on the same side of the table figuring out this solution to a problem. So that was a mile marker for me to remember to always be curious, no matter how upset we are about what's happening. Next is just to take ownership. It's amazing when you say, "I'm sorry about this," or you realize, that you had a part in this problem as well. The other person can also reflect that behavior. Just like our defensive behavior can be reflected, when we apologize or we take ownership, the other person can reflect that too. And so that's another great way to engage the mess. And then lastly is using soft startups. So remembering to come across very calm and soft. I have some examples on this next slide of how we can really come across in a soft manner. And this really has a dual benefit because it allows you to kind of ask the question and allow the other person to give some more data, but it also gives us time to calm down our nervous system. So it has that dual benefit. So some examples here is help me understand, why is this project running late? What I think I heard you say is that you don't care about something. Am I understanding that correctly? Hey, I noticed you seem a little stressed. Can you tell me about that stress? The story I'm telling myself, I use this one all the time. The story I'm telling myself is that my needs don't matter. And the other person can tell you that is a story, that isn't the story. And it gets you kind of talking about the data that's at play. Can you tell me more about something? Or you can say, when you said X, what did you mean? So these are all examples of what you can do to have a soft startup. Okay, the next behavior you can see on the slide is called suppress the noise. So this is defined as minimizing unnecessary conflict so you can focus on the conflict at hand. So from the research, people talked about continuing to work hard on something, even though there was drama in the workplace or there was something else happening around them. So they're minimizing one thing to focus on something else. Or they're ignoring a conflict within a conversation because they want to focus on the main point in a meeting. And uh, another story that I think of that was in the data was there was two leads in a night shift that oversaw other employees, and the employees, because it was nighttime, maybe had a few more arguments or disagreements. And these two leads, they would just, whatever someone complained about, they would say, thank you, that's my fault. You can blame me. I will take responsibility for this. And that allowed the employees to continue working what they needed to. And then those night shift leads to be able to solve those problems, even if it wasn't them who instigated it or even their problem to begin with. If they took ownership and kind of suppressed all of the noise that came their way, they were able to have a really high functioning team. Before I talk more about this behavior, suppress the noise, I just want to mention that suppress the noise does not mean suppress our emotions. I think it's easy to think, well, I'm just going to shut down, I'm just not going to feel, but that's not what this means. Some of you are familiar probably with Brene Brown and her research, and she says that most people can only identify three different emotions: mad, sad, and glad. But the more emotions that we can identify, the better equipped we are to handle the situation. So if you are angry, which oftentimes is referred to as a secondary emotion, it can mean that something's unjust. Maybe you can take an action of setting a boundary or seek comfort, or you could bring in a supervisor or share that problem with somebody who has the power to resolve that. If you're fearful, maybe you're fearful of losing a job. What that means is there's a threat that's there that you need to solve, and that the action step could be to seek safety. It could be to apply for other jobs. It could be that you need to kind of cut your budget for the time period, or that you need to plan with your family of how you can maybe overcome this hardship or this difficulty if it does happen, because the fear means it's just a potential thing, right? Frustration means that there's an obstacle that's blocked. Um, and that you need to problem solve or adjust for your expectations. Guilt, maybe you did something that you're not proud of. Maybe you cut somebody off in a meeting, and your values are being compromised. And so that means that you just need to either extend self-compassion to yourself, or maybe you need to make amends with somebody or reconnect with somebody or make an apology. Uh, and then lastly, sadness. I think this one is key because we can lose something of value. And I think it extends beyond just losing maybe a person or a loved one, but we can be sad over losing a dream, a relationship, a goal, maybe losing our health. And that just means we need to take time to grieve and to be sad, to shed some tears, to talk about it with a good friend, and to overcome that sadness. So I want to highlight that we need to attend to our emotions, because our emotions is really our body telling our brain what's happening on the inside that we need to have a response to. So here you can see the data again about suppress the noise. You can see that there's 7 themes here, and this extra one is focusing on what's important. And so that means that we're not going to focus on the gossip, that we're going to focus on whatever that task is at hand. So remembering that when our body is in conflict, our capacities really shrink, our focus is narrowed. And so we need to kind of focus what's on our list, right? We need to reprioritize things that we're focusing on what's most important. Um, this also makes me think of Kevin O'Leary, who's on the Shark Tank. He talks about signal and noise, that signal are the most important things that we need to spend our time on, things that move the needle. Spend 80% of your time there, and then 20% of your time on things that are all the extra things. Um, I also want to point out that suppressing the noise is not the same as avoidance. It's really an intentional avoidance, and it's keeping your own needs and the other person's needs at play. You're not avoiding because it's uncomfortable or that you don't like dealing with conflict, but you're avoiding intentionally, like you're avoiding participating in gossip because it harms yourself and it harms the other person. Or you're ignoring a comment that was made because that is kind of superfluous to the situation, and you still care about the other person, you care about the task at hand. So it's really this intentional caring about both parties. Okay, so suppressing the noise is minimizing unnecessary conflict to focus on the task at hand. You need to identify things that aren't critical and aren't going to change so that you can minimize those and that you can focus on what's important. The next one is refusing to ruminate. And I think this one is really important because the more that our mind is just focused on something, the more that our body continues to respond in this negative way. It reminds me of the Zeigarnik effect. A theorist developed this in the 1920s, and he talked about how our mind continues to ruminate on things that are incomplete tasks. So if you're folding the laundry and you get interrupted and you're working on something else, your mind is still kind of thinking about folding the laundry. But if you completed folding the laundry, you no longer are thinking about the laundry. And this theorist says that you can use this to your advantage. So if you're trying to write a book, he suggests that you can stop kind of mid-sentence or mid-paragraph, and your mind continues to think about that essay or that book you're trying to write, and that you want to go back to it. And I think this relates to problem solving, because if you haven't engaged the mess, if you haven't completed the conflict, if you haven't engaged or talked or solved the problem, your mind is going to ruminate on it because it's trying to tell you there's something that you need to do. So it's like two sides of a coin: suppress the noise and engage the mess. Next is be judicious with who you pull into a conflict. So while you might need to bring in HR, you might need to bring in a boss to talk about this conflict, you don't want to talk about it with everybody in the office. You don't want to talk about it with too many people, because then your body is still processing this. You're continuing to bring these same emotions up. So try to be judicious with who you talk to about this conflict. Next, you can see this model about what types of conflicts, of when to lean into suppressing the noise and when to lean into engaging the mess. And that middle here is of this Venn diagram is when you should lean on both. So you can see you want to suppress the noise when you're distracted or you have a prioritization or interpersonal issues. But when there's a misunderstanding or a safety concern, you want to address it right away. You really want to lean on engaging that mess. And there's a lot really that's in that middle ground, right? Interpersonal issues, a task issue. You want to suppress any of that rumination, but you also want to engage what needs to be engaged. There's many benefits of engaging conflict positively. So 75% of employees actually have seen the benefits of conflict being resolved in a positive way. I know I used to work at a five-star resort in Scottsdale, Arizona, and the managers would get together and they would review different things that would happen within the hotel that were negative. So they were the problems, right? So if maybe somebody walked into the hotel room and there was a hair on the pillow, or maybe someone had to wait too long to have their food delivered to them in the restaurant, they would really have these problems. They'd lean into the problem and they'd think, how can we make a good repair? So they might send up an hors d'oeuvre to that person's room. They might treat them to a golf trip. And by doing that, they really resolve conflict well. And it was fun in the moment to see how positive the guests responded to that. But what really spoke to me about it was that you could track those same people where a mistake was made, a conflict happened, and repair was made. Those individuals came back to the hotel again and again and again, because a good repair really establishes a relationship where people want to be close and they want to continue leaning into that relationship. So you can see all of those positive things that happen when we really navigate conflict well. And it's really a differentiator between a thriving work environment and one that is not thriving. So, and I just want to remind you again that you never know when you might want a letter of recommendation from somebody, or when you're going to work with that person again in the future. You just don't know. So having that productive conflict is a very good thing. Okay, I have one last bonus skill here of an idea of how you can lean into conflict, and that is through play. So can you be lighthearted? This did not come into play with the stories about conflict, but this is actually from research. It was just published 2 weeks ago in the journal, International Journal of Play. And this is where I asked professionals about workplace play. And what I was amazed was when I asked them about stories about play, was 23% of the stories that people shared were about navigating conflict together. It was about preventative conflict, doing something to kind of build trust. But then it was also about when there was conflict of maybe saying a joke to kind of lighten the tension, or diffusing a situation, or going out and playing basketball together just to remind each other that you like playing together, you like being together. When we play with other people, it's the way that we co-regulate with others. It's a reminder that we were in the social engagement system and that we enjoy being together. And so I encourage you, is there a way that you can actually playfully navigate conflict with other people? So I just wanted to recap on what we talked about today. There's 2 main behaviors, but then 1 extra. So engage the mass. Can I be curious? And think about that conflict that we started with at the very beginning of our talk today. Can you be curious? Can you ask questions? Can you take ownership? Can you use a soft startup? Can you suppress the noise? And so that's really identifying things that aren't critical so you can focus on what is important, not ruminating, and be judicious with who you pull in. And then lastly, is there a way that you can be playful about this situation and remember that you enjoy working with these people? And that is the end of my talk today. But I'm looking forward to taking some of your questions. And then also there's my email address. If you think of things later on that you would like to discuss or have questions about, I'm happy to answer them.
Wow, Shannon, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I know that we have a lot of questions already from our audience. I will say, if you are someone with a raised hand, that's not how we're doing this time, but good impulse. I like it. And if we were in a classroom, we would ask you to raise your hand. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to input it. Okay. Thank you so much because we have over 250 participants at our highest peak. So we can't unfortunately call on everybody, but we're going to do our best to get to a maximum number of questions. And if we don't, you have Shannon Fletcher's email address right here to continue the conversation. We are also, as a reminder, recording this session. So if you missed something or want to share it with someone else, it will be back on the PON website in just a couple of days. Although, given there's the Thanksgiving holiday, it might be more like a week. And we will also link to the research that underpins all of today's presentation so that people can check out the article if they want to go further. All right, with that preamble, I think we're going to get to some questions. First, Shannon, I'd love to ask, you revised a conflict management framework, and what was that process like? Coming in as a researcher, how did you go about that? And is there any more insight that you'd like to share with us about what it was like to delve into that work?
Yeah, it is really interesting. It was an inductive study, so it's a little bit different than most studies that happen. Usually, you start with the theory. You start with like, here's a conflict management model, and here's a theory. Let's see. Let's collect some data to see if we can change it. And this was really an inductive study. So 95% of studies that happen are deductive. So you start with a theory. And this one really started with just hearing stories. So it's a little bit strange because you don't totally know where the stories are going to take you or where the data is going to take you. And so we really saw these same concepts continue to come up, those 6 different themes or those 7 different themes. And so then you just continue to just read through the data. Where do we find this? Where do we see this? And this really felt like the place that we saw it was this Silva and Ising's model that we could place them in a constructive way, that you're either leaning into conflict or leaning away from conflict. So it is kind of a process because you don't really know where you're going. You just kind of see the data and you let the data lead.
Great. Thank you so much. Um, uh, let's see. There are a couple questions here that I'm going to synthesize around avoidance. And the question, the gist of it is how can, I noticed on the framework we were talking about avoidance, but what about a situation where there is a conflict, but the other party is avoiding it? How would you engage? Maybe play is one of the answers there, but are there others that you can think of?
Yeah, I think that people do have a tendency to avoid just because there's not very many models out there of how to effectively engage. And I think the stakes are high. Sometimes we think that if we don't navigate it exactly right, that we're going to lose that relationship or lose something. And so people are often hesitant to engage. So I think helping people feel safe. And so there's many different ways you can do that, whether it's sending an email ahead of time, or sending a text, or grabbing somebody after a meeting when you see them face to face. And there's more channels that you can kind of show them, hey, I'm calm too. Like I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to
Yeah.
avoid something. But I just want to establish that trust and to build into that trust. We're not going to avoid this. So uh, someone else can choose to avoid, but I think to have healthy conflict, if you can lean in, I just encourage you to do that in a calm way, in a kind way.
Yeah. Yeah. There are some questions about this concept of being playful and how do you introduce that, right? Is it because that's a shift for a lot of folks in the way that you would handle discussions in a workplace. So would you couch that in a framework at first, or would you just go about it and see if folks go along? Do you have any advice?
Yes. You're making me think. I was teaching an MBA course this last year, and I was introducing this concept of play to them. And all of these MBA students work in the tech world because here I am in Seattle, right? So we have people from Meta and people from Microsoft and just stacked with tech workers. And there was a student who raised their hand immediately and said, I do not understand this play at work thing. don't agree with it. And so here I am, ready to talk about why play is such an important thing. And I remember that there were several students who, before I could even open up my mouth, just said that they see that is the most effective way to handle conflict. And they gave so many fantastic examples. A couple that come to mind. One of them, they had to do customer service calls on a rotating basis, and no one wanted to answer the phones. And it was kind of this conflict of like wanting to avoid, who's actually going to be on deck. And so what the manager did was he got this oversized, huge ducky and would place the ducky on the person's desk that was in charge of doing the phones. And it made the person laugh. It made it obvious who's going to be answering these phones. And they all laughed about it. And it kind of brought them all together. And he said then people started wanting the ducky on their desk. And so it was just kind of interesting how play can really resolve a situation. I'll give you another example. I realize that I'm a professor, so this might not totally relate to all of your examples of conflict, but I'm supposed to post outside of my office when my office hours are for each quarter. And there was one quarter that I just didn't. So many other things were happening that I just neglected to do it. And I got an email from my supervisor saying, your office hours are not listed. And I still did not do it, which is not like me, but I didn't. And so one of my colleagues actually, in a playful way, they came up with my office hours for me. And it said, from 9 to 10 does yoga, from 10 to 11, paints my toenails, from 11 to 12 watches a movie. And it was so funny. I laughed at it, but I obviously didn't want that up outside my office anymore. So it induced the right behavior in a very playful way. No one had to get mad. No one had to get defensive, but it was just a playful way. And I think that we forget when our body's responding the way it is to conflict, we forget that we can step in and be playful.
Yeah. A wonderful lesson in advance of Thanksgiving tables and maybe some conflict there. And you mentioned that you're a parent. I am also one, and I would say with our kids, I think I've often learned that play is a great way to avoid, or de-escalate from conflict.
Yeah.
We have a number of questions in the chat from people who must live inside my head and their own about rumination. And before I think about the laundry that I'm going to need to get to at some point, how do we stop? Do you have any advice or tips? Has that come up in your research?
Yeah. I think one of the best ways to stop ruminating, because our body is trying to tell us something. Our body is bringing this up for some reason, right? And to ask yourself, like, is there a feeling that's attached to this? Am I afraid of something? Do I feel guilty because maybe I had a piece to play in this? Do I need to make an amend to somebody? Do I just feel sad about something? Do I just need to take some time to just process this? Um, and I think that if we take care of our emotions and if we engage the mess where we need to, because maybe we do need to talk to somebody about something in a calm way, I think that helps us a lot with rumination because it's not just our mind circulating on something, we're actually being able to take action and resolve something
Yeah.
proactively.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. We have a number of questions that I will synthesize the differences that might be accounted for. So, has your research or other research that you're familiar with looked into differences in gender, in culture, perhaps in seniority levels in workplace discussions for different strategies or to implement, in the case of conflict?
Yeah, that is great. I think that would be the next level or the next step in this research is to look at different scenarios. Um, the purpose of this research is really to find common themes. So it's taking something that's kind of disparate or a lot of different people and see what is the commonalities between all of them. But I think there's great value in looking at what you said, the different levels of an organization, different people groups, different types of organizations. I mean, any type of difference, looking at what strategies work best in a particular situation. But I think that's where deductive research really comes into play. Is you take this new theory now, and then you can use it in different ways to say, how can we apply it to different situations or different people? So I love the question, and I would love more research to be on this because I think there's a lot more questions to be answered.
Yeah, it sounds like lots of folks are saying, okay, well, what if I'm in the subordinate role and my supervisor is this way? Or what if I'm the supervisor and I have, so I think that folks would appreciate, a further investigation. So maybe that's your next avenue for discussion. We have a question about the vagus nerve. And, I think a lot of people really appreciated learning about this. Is there any way, have you ever encountered vagal nerve damage in research, and does that have an impact? Is there some kind of, neurological change that has ever come up, and what would that entice or yeah, result in?
Great questions, and I don't have answers to that. That's not my specialty, but I think that would be something really interesting. If we have an actual physical limitation on our vagus nerve, man, I would definitely think that that would have an impact on things.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, I still think that the principles here are the same, right? Is that we want safety. We all want safety. And so if we can project that to other people and if we can give it to ourselves, then we enter into conflict better. So great question, and would love that. Would love answers on that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And Shannon, as you went about this, what surprised you the most as you were encountering this? Was there something that really didn't feel intuitive to you when you came to look across these studies?
Yeah, I mean, I think what surprised me is so much of this is new. Um, the words engage the mass and suppress the noise actually came from the data. They're not out there anywhere else.
Mm.
People actually said them or people referred to them. And so I think that was kind of surprising of like, um, how are we like entering into conflict and engaging with other people? Or how are we suppressed? I just think the constructs themselves are kind of surprising and interesting. Um, I think outside of that, I think being playful is kind of an interesting one too, just because it's not natural when we're compromised, our vision, our hearing, our heart is beating, we want to flee, we want to leave. It's not natural to go into a playful mode, right? And so I think it really speaks to that we need to create an environment where we're playing already. Because when we are playing, when we are building trust with other people, when we are setting up an environment where we can engage in conflict, that's really the best, right? Because then when um, our reaction becomes heightened and we are aroused, we can go back to default of what we know in that culture, right? So I think I learned a lot about kind of leadership setting the tone that we can be playful, that we can engage, and that really sets the tone for how an environment functions and how they work through conflict well. So I guess lots of nuggets there.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think a lot of what you're showcasing is being more offensive on the offense in terms of going
Mhm.
after conflict and not stepping back from it. And I think for a lot of people that will feel uncomfortable and surprising, but the research is definitely showing how helpful that can be. Um, I will pose a last question from the chat from Katie, which is one of the biggest barriers that she can imagine is the idea that people need to be held accountable for something that's perceived as unjust. And so, how do you diffuse conflict when there's sort of an impulse to, hang on to it for accountability's sake?
Yeah. From the question, it seems almost like accountability is weaponized there in an odd way.
Yeah,
Um,
that's how I'm interpreting it too. Yeah.
yeah. Because accountability is a good thing. And I think the key here is that you're on the same side of the table with somebody. So both of you are looking at this problem together. Because when we're weaponizing accountability, we're thinking the other person is a problem. And yes, we all have our faults, we all have shortcomings. But if we come at it in an attacking and aggressive way, the other person's not going to respond well. We're going to continue to um, uh, have negative thoughts towards the other person. And really, we just need to be on the same side looking at the problem together. So taking
Yeah.
ownership, saying, here's some of my faults, and the other person can kind of hopefully come through with theirs as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Looking towards the problem and not the people specifically. Very much something that
Yep.
we talk about here in the program on negotiation. So, all right, Shannon, that is it for questions. I know that we have more, but I think we've hit on the major themes. So everyone, thank you for joining us today. A big thanks to Dr. Shannon Fletcher for sharing her expertise and knowledge. We are so grateful to you, and we have put her email in the chat in case you have further questions, as well as a link to her research so that it can be viewed. As a reminder, the recording of this event will be up, within a week on the PON website. So if you'd like to review it or share it with someone else, we just got a comment saying, "I hope to hear more from Dr. Fletcher." So you're expected for a second showcase sometime when your next series of research comes out. A big thank you to our staff once again. And I will preview our last event of 2025 coming up in December, a Kelman seminar with two incredible journalists who I had the pleasure of hearing speak at Harvard Law School, Yusra Halou and Masha Froliak, talking about negotiating access as a journalist. So that will be on December 16th. And as you can see, we are already scheduling events into 2026. Stay tuned for more from David Hoffman and Julia Minson, both PON professors, and others as we continue to schedule out. So we hope to see you at a future PON live event, or of course at any one of our amazing courses that we hold either in person here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or online. Wishing all of our community members in the United States a very happy Thanksgiving in advance. We will let you get back to cooking and stop ruminating about your grocery and shopping list, and look forward to seeing you in the month of December. Thank you.